Thanks, Sam, and welcome, everyone. Today we're certainly going to be talking about the task or the jobs or the compliance opportunities we have as we open the new account process, the new accounts today. And I particularly want to talk about the personal accounts and, of course, business accounts. And then we also can take some time, I think, to talk about special groups like non-resident aliens and non-government organizations and some of the due diligence issues for our higher risk customers as we go through. This isn't some of it rocket science, and it's not an exact science. I guess I'd rather say it that way, in that what's going to happen as you go through this process of particularly looking at CIP and due diligence issues from the VSA side of things, it really varies from institution to institution. Now, certainly some of the regulations do not vary from the size of your institution or the risk that you have as a financial institution. So we'll kind of talk about that as we go through today. So you should have received a copy of the slides, and you also received a little handbook. You do not have to use the handbook today if you choose not to, but it'll be there, and it's a little more detailed when it comes to the worksheets and things like that. So whichever is most comfortable for you today as I kind of take you through this journey of sitting across the desk from the customer and accomplishing the task that we have in front of us. Many years ago, when I was I say a baby, but back in the day, as we all like to say now, when you opened accounts, the signature card was, a 3x5 recipe card, and I've actually seen those files that we used to have, those little wooden files, sold now in antique stores. But just to kind of dial back and remember how simple it used to be, that it was not a contract, but simply a sample of your signature. And as the time has progressed and the signature cards have become legal contracts with 9/11 and some of the other things that have occurred, we now have a much more detailed signature card account agreement to use that to document not only our contract with the account holder, but also to prove that we've gone through the regulatory process that we have to go. So that's what we're going to walk through today. I am sure your sales staff would also like to think of this in terms of the sales opportunities you will have as you're going through and sitting across the desk from your customer. So you'll have to marry that. You'll have to take the things that I'm talking about today and also how you'll accomplish these goals and tasks and opportunities without offending the customer and still bringing sales opportunities as we walk through. I think now it's so much different, and the questions are so much more invasive than they used to be. But we can all kind of remember where this really kicked up. I mean, we thought it was kicked up before 9/11. But on 9/11, when the terrorist attack happened in New York City, there was a resulting law, and that law is called the U.S. Patriot Act. And one teeny little section of that Patriot Act, called Section 326, was just a few paragraphs, but it was aimed at the financial institutions that had opened the accounts for the terrorists with bogus ID and bogus tax identification numbers. So Congress came in and they said to the U.S. Treasury, you write some regulations, and the Treasury did, and those resulting regulations were called CIP. So we are going to start today this journey with CIP, and we're going to add to it due diligence, and then we're going to go from there and kind of building these things that we have to accomplish when we sit down across the desk from the customer and say, good morning, I'm so glad you came in, and we're delighted to open that account for you, and then we start through the process that we have to do. So the history of this is a process of regulatory compliance issues that have happened over time, and for you to really nail down customer ID programs, you not only have to have a copy of the regulation, you also have to have a copy of the frequently asked questions that they have issued in light of the regulation, and also a copy of your own policy. many times I find financial institutions have much stricter policies than the regulation. And so because of that, you'll be held accountable by your examiners to your own policy for CIP when you begin the new account process. So you can begin in your handout, your big handout, if you did print it. You can begin kind of tracking along on page 7 of your big handout, page 8, and there's a copy on page 9 of the U.S. Patriot Act, Section 326. So it might help you afterwards, after this program, to take a minute and pull your CIP, make yourself a few notes right now, and just go back and say, what does my policy say? Is my policy clear enough? Is my policy up to date? Are we doing things that are not in the policy? Do I need to add some identifications? These are all good things to review as you begin looking at new accounts. So the Customer Identification Program, then, is one of the 17 tasks that we'll be talking about today, and we are certainly going to go through a lot of other ones like OFAC and Reg GG and your red flags for identity theft and your tax ID number, your job as a withholding agent, and all of those sorts of things. We're certainly going to take time to do some of those. I bet that you have been in situations where quite often you might be in the situation where a customer might say to you across the desk, well, the bank down the street didn't ask me for all that information. And as you work with them, you'll find that they really do vary from institution to institution, how much ID you get, how deep does the institution go on the identification. All of that is part of this. So again, as we mentioned earlier, it did start with the U.S. Patriot Act, where President Bush signed that bill into law, and this resulting thing that we call Customer Identification Program. It is a part of the BSA now, and these regulations are required that you follow them, of course, and they are a part of this plan to deter terrorism and money laundering, to make sure that all financial institutions know who they are doing business with. So when we begin looking at this and breaking it down in its components, you have to have reasonable procedures, and your financial institution has to have reasonable procedures for verifying the identity of any person who opens the account. I don't know if you remember, but it used to say seeks to open, and so we had to even run CIP on people we turned down for accounts, and maintain records of the information used to verify the person's identity and determine whether the person appears on a list of known or suspected terrorists or terrorist organization. There is still something called the 326 list in the regulation. There is no existing 326 list at this time. There is the OFAC list. There is certainly the 314As that we check. But at this time, there is no 326 list. But you can kind of see why they might have left it there. If there's another terrorist attack, that they then can come populate a list that they would particularly be looking for and call it the 326 list. So it's still a part of the regulation, but there's not actually any population of that list at this point. So the Patriot Act originally talked about persons seeking to open an account, and that was later changed to a person that actually opens an account. So as we begin making this compliance connection and walking through these tasks, when you're sitting across the desk from that customer, as I mentioned earlier, they're going to say, well, you know, that financial institution down the street didn't make me get all this information. Now, whether you're a credit union or whether you're a bank, you have to comply with CIP. So the chances are the institution down the street did, but maybe not as far. Maybe they didn't go as far. Maybe your institution gets 2 forms of ID. Maybe their institution gets 1 form of ID. So this has to do with the risk your financial institution has for money laundering and for financial crimes. And so your BSA officer